Something that you may not know, that he is a true blue, just a minute, he's a true blue Maplay of Tamil Nadu. That is something we found out when we were having a preparatory discussion. That's something I had to say, but he is here today in his capacity as the author of multiple books. The latest, The Light of Asia, will be the main topic of conversation, and of course, the man himself. Friends, entrepreneurs, countrymen, join me in welcoming Mr. Jairam Ramesh. Welcome, sir. And that's the only time I'll be calling you, sir.
Thank you, Pravin. Thank you. And just so that I establish my credentials, I got married in Tiruvamur. My mother-in-law still lives in Tiruvamur. And my wife's property is still in Tiruvamur. So I'm very much Tiruvamur.
Very nice. And
Second Seaward Road.
Yes. And for those of you wondering about the levity, well, I have been given the license to go ahead and be as irreverent as possible. I may not be that much, but definitely there are a few curveballs and bouncers coming your way, Mr. Jairam. But let's start off by hearing from the man himself. The controls are over to you, Mr. Jairam, and we would love for you to set the stage. Tell us more about this book, The Light of Asia, the poem that defined the Buddha.
Well, Pravin, I'm glad. The only commercial I will do in the next 60 minutes is to just show you this cover, which you have done. So this is the most recent book of mine. As Pravin said, it's called The Light of Asia, the poem that defined the Buddha. And it's a two-in-one biography. It's a biography of an epic poem that became a milestone in Buddhist historiography, first published in 1879 in London in English by Sir Edwin Arnold. And it really, what it did was popularize the life of the Buddha. And to use today's language, the Buddha went viral after the publication of this epic poem. Now, embedded in this biography is the biography of a poet. You cannot distinguish really a poem from its poet. You can't separate them out. And so Edwin Arnold is a very unusual person, because he translated, he was principal of Pune College, which later became the Deccan College between 1857 and 1860. He translated the Hitopadesha, translated the Gita Govinda, translated the Mahabharata, and most importantly, he translated the Bhagavad Gita. It was the fourth or the fifth English translation of the Bhagavad Gita as the song Celestial. And this became the abiding text for Gandhi, for Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, later Mahatma Gandhi, and it remained an abiding text for him till his very end. So Edwin Arnold is an unusual figure, a soft imperialist, a believer in British rule in India, a believer in the modernization and civilizing mission of India, but at the same time, a great popularizer of Indian culture, of Indian literary classics, and an Orientalist scholar in the best sense of the term, in the academic, in scholarly sense of the term. So basically, this is an exploration, Pravin, of why the poem became such a sensation, why it influenced music, why it influenced art, why it got translated into over 30 languages, including Tamil, in the early part of the 20th century. It has 3 or 4 translations in Tamil, first by A. Madhavaiya, going back to the late 19th century, and then kept getting translated into other languages, all Indian languages. So why did this poem become such a sensation? And why do we need to understand the life and personality of Sir Edwin Arnold? So this is, in short, a capsule summary of what this book is all about.
Brilliant. Now, let us start the Q&A. And for all you viewers, feel free to send in your questions about the book, about the author, about the writing process. You can type it in here or in Facebook Live and YouTube. I'm obviously not there, but I have my colleagues from TiE Chennai who will pass it on.
Any question other than Indian politics?
Yes, absolutely. And I was about to get to that as the moderator. That is out. But here, the man, the author, and the books, we can definitely ask. The next three questions are rapid fire, Mr. Jairam. So I would need your answer, pat and really short. This is the IPL season. So these are the opening balls, and then we will move into the middle overs. So the first question, who is this book for?
It's for the general reader. Hardwired into every Indian, Pravin, is the Buddha. We may not be Buddhists. We may not be, followers of Buddhism in the doctrinal sense of the term. But every Indian has the Buddha in his heart or in his mind. And there is no Indian I know who doesn't have some icon, some painting, some image of the Buddha in his drawing room or her drawing room or bedroom or wherever the case may be. So this book is really for the person who is interested in the life of the Buddha. Not about Buddhism. I distinguish Buddha and Buddhism. I'm deeply, suspicious of any ism. I'm not into any ism. So I distinguish Buddha from Buddhism. And those of you who are interested in knowing how the Buddha became such an iconic figure all over the world, in Europe, in England, in America, and how the Buddha became a symbol of social transformation and social protest in the subcontinent, in India, I think this book is meant for that.
Good. You are addressing a bunch of entrepreneurs here. How is this book pertinent to entrepreneurs?
Well, Buddha was in many ways the first entrepreneur. He was the first historical entrepreneur. There have been many mythological entrepreneurs, but Buddha is the first historical entrepreneur. And why do I say this, Pravin? I say this because the essential message of the Buddha was be your own lamp, search for yourself, make your own mistakes, follow your own path. See, Buddha was not a moksha data.
Right.
Buddha was a marga data. And so I think entrepreneurs are people who find their own margas, right? They find their own paths. They stumble. They make mistakes. Buddha stumbled. Buddha made mistakes. I mean, Siddhartha stumbled. Siddhartha made mistakes. And then, of course, he became the Buddha. So I think that's one reason why this book should appeal to entrepreneurs. And the second reason, of course, is that, even you may be an entrepreneur, you're a wealth creator, you are creating prosperity. But ultimately, Pravin, you have to have a sense of personal ethics. You have to ground yourself. You have to anchor yourself in a system of personal rights, personal do's, personal don'ts, not in the religious sense of the term, but in the ethical sense of the term. So beautiful. Buddha was that. Buddha did not preach a new religion. Buddha said, there is a thing called ethics. There is a thing called right thought. There is a thing called right behavior, right? So I think that's very important in the entrepreneurial context. You create wealth, but you create wealth embedded in an ethical framework, in a framework of values. Ooh. If you're not, then you're not. Or not. I mean, why is Narayana Murthy an iconic entrepreneur? Because Narayana Murthy, in my view, epitomized entrepreneurship anchored in a spirit of values and ethics.
This is a beautiful answer. For the rest of you viewers, Mr. Jairam Ramesh clearly said he does not want any questions in advance because that keeps him on his toes, keeps us on our toes. But what a beautiful answer there. As an entrepreneur, I can take a whole lot back that especially the last 18, 19 months of suffering, we can give it all up and start afresh. And that is a significant take. Now, back to this book here, The Light of Asia. I didn't know about the book until I started reading your book. And I'm referring more to the tagline, the poem that defined the Buddha. Does a poem in late 1800s, is that required to define him? Why this tagline?
Well, because the Buddha had been forgotten, Pravin, and it's only the rediscovery of Buddha starts in the beginning of the 19th century. First, there is the epigraphical rediscovery of the Buddha. Then there is the textual rediscovery of the Buddha. Then there is the archaeological rediscovery of the Buddha. And it's only by the end of the 19th century, when this poem comes out in 1879, that the Buddha is returned to the central place in not just Indian thought, but also world thought and world philosophy. Right. So I think it's the rediscovery of the Buddha. We have rediscovered the Buddha. And I think the main purpose of this poem, in my view, and the main purpose of my writing about this poem, if you ask me, why did I embark on this venture? I think the reason why this poem became such a sensation, why it is still read, why it is still translated. Incidentally, it was translated into Chinese as late as 2015. This is the process of, the Chinese trying to appropriate Buddhism to their own ends. It got translated into Bhojpuri a couple of years ago. So the process of translation continues. Now, I think the essential message is, and this is how I actually end the book, that the poem became the sensation because it focused on the humanity of the Buddha. It didn't focus on the divinity of Buddha. Now, India particularly is a divinity surplus, humanity deficit country. There's no shortage of gods and goddesses in our country. But there are a shortage of people who want to use the knowledge that they have for social transformation. And I think that's what the poem tried to convey. And this is what I was trying to convey in the book, that there is a meditative, contemplative, speculative Buddha, but there is also a progressive, revolutionary, radical Buddha. And what India needs is less contemplation and meditation and more progressive attack on whatever social prejudices and social ills. I mean, Buddha attacked the caste system, he attacked animal sacrifice, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the essential contemporary message, because entrepreneurs are always saying, okay, what's in it for me? Why do I need to read this book today? And I think the reason why you would want to read this book really is because Buddha is so much part of our consciousness. Buddha has shaped our thinking, irrespective of which religion and which faith you are, which you adhere to, that it's important to understand that this personality of the Buddha that you and I and people who are watching this program carry in their minds,
right,
is only 150 years old. This is, this was the Buddha that got rediscovered in the 19th century and who was popularized in the world through this poem that was published. So that's why I use the word, a rather strong word, the poem that defined the Buddha.
Right.
It defined the Buddha. It didn't define Buddhism.
Right.
It defined who the Buddha was and how he became the Buddha.
Oh, beautiful. And I did make a note, but before that, Lokesh Raj here beat me to it, that of your punchline, that India is a divinity surplus and a humanity deficit company. So that's a punchline. Lokesh, you are talking to somebody who is an orator who's been in the upper house of the parliament, and therefore punchline is something that is a part of his DNA. But this is in continuation to your previous answer. You did mention it in a line, but I'm very curious to know why you picked the Light of Asia as the topic of your next book. What provoked or prompted you?
Pravin, this was a poem that I read when I was very young. I must have been 14 or 15 when I read this book, and it remained in my mind for years. And I'm enamored and captivated by the life of the Buddha. I read about the Buddha. As I said, I'm not a Buddhist by any means, but who was the Buddha? And how did Buddha shape? Why did Vivekananda, why did Tagore, why did Gandhi, why did Nehru, why did Ambedkar make Buddha to be this iconic figure? And when I dealt in over the years, I kept thinking about this, the influence that Buddha had, not only in the West, but and also in Asia. I mean, look at many countries,
Right.
all over Asia. Buddha is perhaps the greatest export that India had long before IT exports started. So I wanted to understand, how is it that the contemporary thinking of Buddha was shaped? And every time I tried to understand, this poem would stare at me, in the face, because this was 1879. This was the period when Buddha was being popularized, Buddha was being discussed. And that's the reason why I thought, okay, I've written, my last 3 books have been biographies of individuals.
Right.
Maybe I should do something different. I'm an academic entrepreneur of sorts. I don't create wealth, but I create pages and pages of text. And I said, okay, let me not write a biography of an individual. It's time to write a biography, a different type of biography. And that's how I really sort of got my mind onto. I wanted to do something on the Buddha.
Right.
That was, like every Indian, I'm sure, I just want to show this to you. This is on my table. I mean, I've been doing this since the last 50 years. And I'm sure there's one in your room, in your study somewhere.
Yeah. There's a prayer thing right there.
I'm sure Mr. Vishwanathan's study as well. So, so that's the reason why I decided that I wanted to do something different. And I had a lot of time on my hands. I started researching this in March of 2020, just about when the lockdown was announced,
right.
Just about that time. So I had more time, a little more time, 6 months to research and write. So, and it was a nice topic to take up at a time of, turbulence all around you.
Right.
You just close your mind off and say, okay, I'm going to do this thing on the Buddha. So from internal peace also.
Biography of individuals, you've done a biography of a poem this time.
Yes, absolutely.
And my take after reading this, Mr. Jairam, is Edwin Arnold was the original marketer of the Buddha to the Western world.
He was a marketer, absolutely.
Who planted the seed in you when you were 14. Yes. And you, to me, are the remarketer of the book because you planted the seed in me when I'm 46. So it's a better late than...
I'm not a marketer. You're right. So Edwin Arnold was a marketer of the life of the Buddha. I'm a marketer of the life of Sir Edwin Arnold.
Yes.
Actually, Pravin, I must tell you this. One of the best known publishing houses in India over the last 150 years is a company in what was then Madras called G.A. Natesan and Company. This used to publish in the early part of the 20th century. All the great books used to be published by J. Natesan and Company. It's a great name in Indian publishing. Now, Natesan and Company produced a book in 1915 called Eminent Orientalists. And one of the eminent Orientalists they wrote about was Sir Edwin Arnold. And they wrote about, his translation of the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, they wrote about the light of Asia, being the definition of the Buddha. The other reason why Sir Edwin Arnold has a special relationship with Chennai is because the Theosophical Society, which moved its international headquarters to Adyar from New York, Pravin, long before offshoring, long before, subcontracting, long before body shopping, long before all you IT guys, discovered, there was a institution that moved from New York to India. Theosophical Society was started in 1875 in New York, but moved its international headquarters, and its international headquarters are still there in 300 acres of beautiful land, in Besant Nagar.
Yes.
Besant Nagar is named after Annie Besant, who was the third president of the Theosophical Society. And the Theosophical Society plays a crucial role in the rediscovery of Buddhism and also the rediscovery of Hinduism by educated elites in India in the late 19th and early part of the 20th century, something that we tend to take for granted now.
Beautiful. Now, I have a question from Somu Chokalingam, but before we get there, I do have a bouncer cheeky question to you. As a part of my research, I read your book and I also read the original Light of Asia. What a beautiful composition in verses. But the question to you is, why is your biography of the book a lot bigger than the actual book itself?
That's because, I'll tell you why, Pravin. That's a very good question. The reason is because there were multiple translations of the poem. And each translation had a purpose. It was translated into Malayalam. It was translated into Tamil. It was translated into Punjabi. It was translated into Hindi. While the English poem, Edwin Arnold wanted to market the life of the Buddha, the translations were not just marketing Buddha. The translations were actually instruments of attack on caste orthodoxy. It was translated in Malayalam by the SNDP, started by the Sri Narayana Guru, which was one of the earliest social reform movements in India. It was translated into Tamil and popularized by people like Eoti Thas and Lakshmi Narsu, who were part of the anti-Brahmin movement in the 1910s and the 1920s and the 1930s. So one of the reasons for the size of this book is because I wanted to deal with the poem and its multiple impacts, its literary impact on people like Tagore, its philosophical impact on people like Vivekananda, its social impacts on people like Ambedkar, Narayana Guru, and so on and so forth. So that's why, this book is longer than the poem. The poem has 50,000 lines. So it's not a short poem.
Right.
It's a 50,000 line poem. But yes, the book is longer than the poem. That's true.
Beautiful. The next question is from one of our members, Somu Chokalingam. Why are you always isolating Buddha and Buddhism?
The reason why I isolate Buddhism is that the Buddha was more than Buddhism. Buddhism reduced Buddha to a set of creed. It was to dogma, to set of do's, a set of don'ts. But Buddha did not say that I'm a god. The moment you say ism, our image is Islam founded by Muhammad, Christianity founded by Christ, but the strength of the Indic civilization has been, and this is true of Hinduism also, it's true of Jainism as well. We have reduced Hindu thought, Buddhist thought, Jain thought to isms, but they are more than isms. They're ways of thinking, they're ways of approaching life. And I think one of the great strengths, take the life of Ashoka, for example. Ashoka, the greatest emperor in Indian history, was a Buddhist. He became a Buddhist. But Buddhism was not the state religion of the Mauryan Empire under Ashoka for 35 years or 36 years. So, one of the great strengths of the Indic, and I use the word Indic, not Indian, Indic, because it has multiple, strands coming into it. There's a Vedic strand, there's a Buddhist strand, there's a Jainic strand. There are other heterodox sects which have, which have died out and which we don't talk about. The Charvakas, the Lokayatas, and the Ajivikas. People don't talk about them. But India was a place where there was a lot of heterodoxy. There was a lot of questioning. There was a lot of argumentation. And Buddha was saying precisely this. Buddha said, don't become a prisoner of ritual. Don't become a prisoner of dogma. Don't follow me because I am not a guru. Be your own guru. Search for your own enlightenment. But he gave a set of ethical, he provided, in my view, he provided the scaffolding. Now, with that scaffolding, you can do what you want, you know. So, but by Buddhism, you and I have a, when we say Buddhism, then, we must have, there must be a church associated with Buddhism. There must be a holy book associated with Buddhism. There must be a ritual associated with Buddhism. But that's why I distinguish the life of the Buddha and Buddhism. So you can be a Hindu and you can be captivated by the Buddha. You can be a Jain and be captivated by the Buddha. You can be a Muslim, you can be a Christian. And indeed, that's what has happened. Indeed, many people across the world are followers of the Buddha without being formally Buddhist.
Beautiful answer. And for you as well as for all the other members, for the last 4 or 5 years, there's a series called the TiE Indic series that's been run by our charter members, J. Krishnan and Ramraj, and which is about taking the learning from Indic and adapting it into entrepreneurship. So you've connected it beautifully. Now, moving ahead, the next couple of questions will be more on Mr. Jairam Ramesh, the writer. So my first question is, what is your research and writing process? Because this is your 9th book. What is your research and writing process?
Well, I don't have research assistants, Pravin. I do it myself. That's number one. Right. Number two, I don't write on any subject unless there is primary archival material. Okay. I don't write books based on oral history. I don't write books based on recollections or interviews. Because, Indians are the greatest inventors of facts. We embroider history. We invent narratives. So I always look for contemporary primary material. All the biographies, the 3 biographies I've written, one on Indira Gandhi, the environmentalist, the other one on P.N. Haksar, the third one on Krishna Menon. It's all based on and even this book, The Light of Asia. Right. It's not based on my thinking. It's based on the archival material that's available in different archives. So for me, that's crucial. And that's very important, Pravin. I want to stress this because India does, in my view, and I'll make a controversial statement here, which may irritate some of your members, India does not have a written historical tradition. Our tradition is an oral tradition. We have either Smriti or Shruti. Smriti is what we remember. Shruti is what we hear. And in fact, the very word of history in Indian languages, what is the word? Itihasa. What does itihasa mean? Itihasa. Thus it was. Thus it was. Simple. So in one way, it's a very straightforward approach. But in the other way, it's very difficult to get chronology. It's very difficult to get documentation. It's very difficult to get 2 sources to agree. So our tradition has been an oral tradition. So I want to, that's my personal belief. Many people disagree with me, but that's okay. We can have this disagreement. I do not want to do anything based on oral sources. I wanted to write something that is based only on written sources. So that's a second element that is integral to my writing. And the third element is I must be emotionally involved. I cannot write only with my head. I have to write with my heart. So this book has been written, of course, with my head. But ultimately, if I was not captivated or enamored of the Buddha, I would not have written this book. Frankly, I wouldn't have written it. Why would I want to write it? So I think those are the ground rules I follow. I set myself a target. Mm-hmm. I spend, once I've decided broadly on the subject I write, I spend 3 months doing intensive research, archival research. Then I produce a first draft for myself. That first draft is between 80,000 to 100,000 words. Right. And once I have a first draft, then I know what is missing, what needs to be added, what needs to be cut, and that 100,000 words then becomes 150,000 words. But I have a discipline that I must write in my writing phase. I must write 1,000 words a day. So if I write 1,000 words a day, about 3 months you can produce 100,000 words, and that's the discipline that I have followed. And womb to tomb. If you were to ask me womb to tomb, each of these books has taken me 14 months. From the womb, from the conception to the tomb, which is, having a discussion like this with you. I mean, in the public, putting the book out in the public.
Right.
It takes me a good 14 months, to produce that.
Awesome, because you answered the next question as well. As we move into the man, Sir Edwin Arnold, there is a question from Shyam, which is related to Buddhism, but I'm going to bounce it off you. If humanity and ethics were the aim, isn't it wrong on the part of Buddha to leave his wife and child, both ethically and on being humane? That's a question we've been doing.
I mean, this is a perennial question, and
Yes.
And there are books now which have looked at Buddha from the point of view of Yashodhara. After all, Buddha was 29 when he gave up Yashodhara and Rahula. Rahula was 6 when, Siddhartha left home. And there have been, Virginia Sassoon has written a very interesting book looking at Buddhism from Yashodhara's perspective. Yes, it would appear that, he was heartless. He gave up. But, it's important to understand, Pravin, that there are different interpretations of why Siddhartha sought the path of renunciation. And that's something I have, dealt with in this book. And let me very briefly in 1 minute summarize that. See, you and I and everybody else watching this program believe that Siddhartha saw 4 sights, and that prompted him to seek the path of renunciation. He saw an old man, he saw a cripple, he saw a dead body, and he saw a monk. The first 3 anguished him, the 4th put him at ease, and he said, I must now seek the meaning of life. That's the traditional Buddhist belief. But that belief was challenged in the 20th century by people like Dharmanand Kosambi, who was India's greatest Pali scholar. And it was challenged by Dr. Ambedkar, who formally became a Buddhist, as you know, in October of 1956. And they believed, based on a reading of Pali sources, that Siddhartha sought renunciation because he was unable to prevent war between the Shakyas, the tribe to which his father belonged, and the Koliyas, the tribe to which his mother belonged. And the rules of the Sangha was such that if you opposed what the Sangha wanted, you went into self-exile. And since the Sangha wanted war between the Shakyas and the Koliyas wanted to fight the Shakyas wanted to fight the Koliya, and they were fighting over the river, control of the river Rohini, which, in those times divided the Shakyas and the Koliyas. So in that reading, Yashodhara understands the reason why Siddhartha chooses the path of self-exile. And she actually helps him. But this is not what traditional Buddhism teaches. Traditional Buddhism, popular Buddhism, says that Siddhartha followed the path of renunciation because he was fed up with sickness, fed up with old age, fed up with death, and wanted to seek the path of nirvana. So there are multiple readings, but it's a very fundamental question. See, for example, many people see Buddha as a social reformer. Many people see Buddha as a man who challenged caste orthodoxy, who challenged Brahminical and Vedic hegemony. But remember, Buddha did not admit women into the Sangha. It was Buddha's cousin Ananda who, according to tradition, convinces Buddha to admit women as Buddhist nuns. So from today's perspective, Pravin, Buddha may have been an anti-caste revolutionary, but he was no gender revolutionary. But the point is, we must not judge historical figures from today's context. We must judge historical figures, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Ashoka, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Vivekananda, whether it's Tagore, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Nehru. We must judge them in the context, whether it's Ambedkar. We must judge them in the context of their times. Because the easiest thing to do is hindsight. Hindsight is a wonderful gift, Pravin. Anybody can have hindsight.
Yeah.
And with the wisdom of hindsight, you can say anything. So I think, please, we must judge these by their historical circumstances.
Beautiful. Well said. Well, there are comments that are coming in from Srijata Bhatnagar. Indians are the greatest inventors of facts, totally in love with the wordplay, womb to tomb. Srijata, Mr. Jairam Ramesh is the Maplay of Tamil Nadu, and he also knows he's talking to entrepreneurs from the land of Rajnikant. So I'm pretty certain he's prepared his punch dialogues accordingly.
No, I'm not, I'm a Maplay of Tamil Nadu, absolutely. I've not lived in Tamil Nadu, but, I keep coming to Tiruvamur, as I say. I have my wife's family's roots are very much in Tamil Nadu.
Oh, it doesn't matter, Mr. Jairam, because we are in the age of appropriation, so we'll happily appropriate you. Now, moving into the man.
Remember, Buddha got appropriated.
Yes. I have a couple of questions.
Incidentally, I must share with you, and those of you who are interested, the first epigraphical evidence of Buddha being appropriated as a Vishnu avatar is in Mahabalipuram. And those of you who have time should go and see the temple there. There you'll find an idol of Buddha as the 9th avatar of Vishnu. And that has been dated to something like the 8th century AD. I mentioned it in the book as well. So by the 8th century, Pravin, Buddha becomes an avatar of Vishnu. Because Buddha was seen as a great, Buddha and Buddhist thought was seen to be a great threat to the hegemony of the Vedic orthodoxy, that the best way the Brahmins of that era thought to deal with this threat is to appropriate the person who is threatening you. So Buddha gets appropriated as a Vishnu avatar. It's interesting. Mahavira doesn't get appropriated. Vardhamana Mahavira doesn't become an avatar of Vishnu. It is Gautama Buddha who becomes the avatar of Vishnu. That's because he was a threat. And you can see that in Mahabalipuram. And by the 12th century, if you read Gita Govinda, which is one of the great works of Sanskrit literature by the poet Jayadeva, you will find there that Buddha is hailed as the 9th avatar of Vishnu. Matsya, Kurma, Varaha, Narsimha, Vamana, Rama, Balarama, Parushrama, Buddha, and of course, the 10th avatar, which is yet to come, which is Kalki.
In the same appropriations line, you have researched and have mentioned about Saint Josephat and how that story, they appropriated a bit of the Buddha as well.
Absolutely. In fact, it was not just the Brahmins who appropriated Buddha, it was the Christians who appropriated the Buddha. Remember, Pravin, once upon a time, all of Central Asia was Buddhist.
Right.
Afghanistan was Buddhist. It was part of the Gandhara. All the 5 stans, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, they were all Buddhist. Azerbaijan was Buddhist. There is a Buddhist republic as part of the Russian Federation. There's been a lot of Jataka tales of the Buddha that have been appropriated within the Christian tradition, and the story of Barlam and Josaphat, which I have dealt with in the book, is one of the great examples. At one point, the entire Asian landmass was covered with Buddhism. The Silk Route was all about Buddhism going out of India and then just embracing all of what we consider to be Asia today. You see this even in China. When I go to China, you see people getting still interested in Buddhism. They've not been able to completely eliminate Buddhism from Chinese society. Japan, of course, is very strongly Buddhist. So is Korea. Thailand is completely Buddhist. Myanmar is Buddhist. Laos, Cambodia are Buddhist. Sri Lanka is completely Buddhist. So it's one of the great paradoxes, Pravin. Buddhism died out in the land of its birth.
Right.
But it's alive and kicking elsewhere.
Now, coming to the man himself, Sir Edwin Arnold, as an entrepreneur, having read your book, there's so much this guy is good at. He's a polymath, so many languages, learned carpentry, gemstones, and the like. Man of varied interests. And to me, as a marketer, every instance he's shown demonstrable proof of his knowledge of that part. For the benefit of our viewers and listeners here, Mr. Jairam, I would love if you could tell a bit more about this man, Sir Edwin Arnold.
Well, he had one thing, Pravin, which is key to a successful entrepreneur. He had a thing called curiosity.
Right.
And one of the things that Indian civilization, Indian tradition has lacked is curiosity. Because, we have always believed that we are the Vishwa Gurus. The world comes to us. We don't go to the world. And in any case, if we cross the world, we would have had to purify ourselves, right? If we crossed our ocean. And this was true till about 100 years ago. So, while historians write about colonies, coal, cotton, Christianity, the 4 C's, which has led to the rise of the West, I add a 5th C, which is curiosity.
Right.
The West was always curious about India. India was not curious about the West. Whether they were the Mughal emperors or the Hindu emperors or the Buddhist emperors, they were just not curious. So curiosity is something that Edwin Arnold had. And curiosity made him fluent in Greek, Latin, French, German, Arabic, Turkish, Persian, Sanskrit, Marathi, So you need curiosity, to be interested in other cultures. So I think the fact that he came to India in 1857, he was principal of the Pune College for 2.5 years. He was coming at a time, remember 1857 is the first war of Indian independence, the mutiny. He's coming at a time when the East India Company is the Queen Victoria, direct crown rule is substituting for the East India Company. So the nature of the British enterprise in India is beginning to change when he is here. And he learns Sanskrit, he learns Marathi, and he retains this childlike curiosity for other cultures. In 1893, Pravin, he falls in love with Japanese. He falls in love with Japan. He falls in love with a Japanese, marries her. And the last 10 years of his life, he's popularizing Japanese culture and Japanese literature, which for the first 60 years or the first 40 years of his life, he did for India. So curiosity is very, very important for an entrepreneur. Since we ultimately, the bottom line of what I say is, what does it mean for an entrepreneur, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Lovely.
I would say curiosity, a very, very important characteristic. Just the urge to learn new things, to empathize with different cultures. I think that was very, very significant feature of his life. He was, by the way, he was a soft imperialist. He was no great believer in Indian political independence.
Right.
But he was a great popularizer of Indian art, Indian literature, Indian drama, Indian philosophy. So he carried with him both these personalities, a split personality, so to speak.
Beautiful. bringing you now closer home, the next two questions are obviously related to Tamil Nadu. The Light of Asia and Tamil has had 3 editions. You briefly touched upon it in the beginning. But I would like to bring your attention to your book, The Asiya Jyoti, which was written by Desigavinayagam Pillai.
Yes,
and
1940.
Yeah, do tell us about what was this allure that it's had 3 and 4 editions in Tamil?
Well, very simply, Pravin, these were all people who were fighting caste hegemony.
Right.
Whether it is Desivinayagam Pillai or whether it was A. Madhavaiah, or whether it was Eothithas or whether it was Lakshmi Narsu. These were all people who were fighting caste orthodoxy and the domination of the Brahmins in public life, in education, and so on. And for them, Buddha was the symbol of social reform. Buddha was the symbol of social protest. Buddha was the symbol of equality and fraternity. And see, they were not so much interested in liberty as much as equality and fraternity. And Buddha for them became that symbol. And the most popular work on who Buddha was the Light of Asia. Right? So they were not interested in the doctrines of Mahayana or Hinayana or Theravada or Vajrayana. They were not interested in theological disputes. They were not interested in the doctrines. They were interested in the politics of Buddha. As I said, they were less interested in the meditative, contemplative, speculative Buddha. They were more interested in the radical Buddha. And the one book that was easily available in beautiful poetry that dealt with the life of the Buddha, not with the doctrines of Buddha. This Buddhism can be as hair splitting as vintage Hinduism. Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, Dvaita. You can have similar things in Buddhism also. And you can have similar things in Jainism also. Hair splitting comes naturally to us in many ways. Of course, I can't say that to you, Pravin, because hair splitting.
Well, I can make
it's only here.
Yeah,
here you can split. But the point is, people like Desivinayagam Pillai and so on, they were using Buddha for their political activism. And they wanted some source for who the Buddha was. And that source was provided by the poem. And that's why the poem ends up getting translated 4 times or 5 times in Malayalam, 3 translations in Tamil, 2 translations in Punjabi, a very influential translation by Ramchandra Shukla in 1922 in Hindi, which popularizes Buddha. So I think it's an important point I want to make here, Pravin. The English poem has literary value.
Right.
People read the English poem as a poem for a literary value, but the translations have a social value.
Right.
That's the distinction between the Tamil Light Asiya Jyoti and the Light of Asia.
Right.
Or the distinction between Buddha Charitam in Malayalam and the Light of Asia. So translations very often end up having larger social agendas, whereas the original may have a limited literary purpose. And that's what the Light of Asia was all about.
The second question in the Tamil Nadu connection is where you quoted our late Chief Minister Karunanidhi, a man of words himself, and his comment here, Light of Asia and Son of Wisdom. Your thoughts on that?
Well, very much so. I mean, Karunanidhi belongs to that long tradition of social movements which preached equality and fraternity. And Karunanidhi was the master wordsmith. There was nobody, who to compare with him. Wonderful. Right. Wonderful. And the Tamil language itself is given, is highly, is a great arena for people with the felicity with words. And, if you see Tamil speeches being given, The descriptions of people themselves are so colorful and so engaging. Raktatil Raktamanile. I remember all these speeches that I've heard in the past. So Karunanidhi, yes, I mean this was during the occasion of the 2550th Mahaparinirvana celebrations of the Buddha. And we celebrated the 2500th anniversary in 1956. And then we celebrated this in 2007. And Karunanidhi used that occasion to draw attention again. But again, I would say, Pravin, he used the Buddha. The reason why this poem became such a sensation was because of the subject. It had less to do with the poet and more to do with the subject. There was a hunger, there was an appetite for a person like the Buddha. There was an appetite in America, appetite in Europe, appetite in India, appetite in England for a ethical figure, not for a divine figure, but for an ethical figure, for a figure who helped you to navigate the vagaries and the uncertainties of day-to-day existence. And ultimately, I think one of the great contributions that the poem made, both in the English and in its translations, was, for long in the 19th century, Pravin, Nirvana had a negative nihilistic concept. The concept of Nirvana was seen to be one of abdication, one of withdrawal, one of, sort of abnegation. But the poem brings out, and as I said, the poem brought out and the translations also bring out that a completely different notion of Nirvana as something more dynamic, more not passive, something more active. If I were to summarize what that concept is, be in the world, but not of the world.
Ah, beautiful.
This is another line for your entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Be in the world, but not of the world. And I think that was a message which resonated across the world in the late 19th and early 20th century. And I think it still has relevance today, Pravin.
Yes.
Be in the world, but not necessarily of the world.
Lovely. Javara Vichi, you have raised your hand. If you have a question, may I request you to please type it in. Before we move into the final segment, there's one question from Anu here. What should we do to make Buddha more relevant to the younger generation?
Well, the knowledge of the Buddha is ubiquitous. People see images of the Buddha. There are, calendars on the Buddha, stone icons of the Buddha, paintings of the Buddha. But I think, as I said, the essential message of the Buddha, we need to bring out. We need to de-emphasize the speculation and the contemplation and the meditation, and to emphasize more on the larger social message of the Buddha, the message of equality, the message of fraternity, the message of, to use a phrase which is used very much now, all-inclusivity. If we use this word all-inclusive without necessarily knowing what it really implies and what it means. So I think that message of the Buddha is, and this message that I said, ultimately, the message of humanity, the message of caring, compassion, the message of not just tolerance. I don't like the word tolerance, Pravin. Tolerance means, okay, theek hai, I'll let you be and I'll be whatever I have. You don't interfere with me, I don't interfere with you, so I'll tolerate you. That's not what Buddha was advocating. Buddha was not advocating tolerance. Buddha was actually advocating engagement, compassion, which is embedded in engagement. And I think that's what we need to bring to the younger generation. Buddha does not mean going off into the mountains and gazing at your own navel. Unfortunately, that's what I think we have reduced Buddha to, navel gazing. Buddha is more than navel gazing.
Now, as I read the book and reread some portions, as an entrepreneur and marketer, Mr. Jairam, it was resonant with what we are doing, that we may be doing a lot with our product or a service or a solution, but it needs the right elements and the right timing for us to make a success out of the product, which is exactly what happened with the poem Light of Asia. How did it become such a sensation? What were the elements at that point? You have covered it in the book, but I would love for you to dwell upon it, because that's what the Creative SIG is all about. What went on with the poem? How did it become such a global sensation? What can I learn from it?
In one word, Pravin, communication. In one word, communication. Arnold, long before, the MBAs had discovered MBA marketing, MBA communication, was communicating. And the 19th century was the period of poetry. It was a century of great poets. Wordsworth, you had Byron, you had Tennyson, of course,
Right.
Arnold. And so, poetry was the language, was the medium. And he conveyed, let me just read out to you the last few lines,
Yes.
and you will get a sense of what the power of communication can do, Pravin. And this is, after 50,000 lines that he has written. And if you don't mind, I'll just read out to you.
Yes, please.
This is how the poem ends. I mean, not my book, but the original Light of Asia ends. Here endeth what I write, who love the master for his love of us. A little knowing, little have I told, touching the teacher and the way of peace. 45 reigns thereafter showed he those in many lands and many tongues, and gave one Asia light that still is beautiful, conquering the world with the spirit of strong grace, all which is written in the holy books, and where he passed, and what proud emperors carved his sweet words upon the rocks and caves, and how in the fullness of the times it fell, the Buddha died, the great Tathagata, even as a man amongst men, fulfilling all, and how 1,000 lakhs since then have trod the path which leads whither he went, unto nirvana, where the silence lives. Ah, blessed Lord, O high deliverer, forgive this feeble script which doth thee wrong, measuring with little wit thy lofty love. Ah, lover, brother, guide, lamp of the law, I take my refuge in thy name and thee. Buddham Sharanam Gacchami. I take my refuge in thy love, in thy law of good. Dhammam Sharanam Gacchami. I take my refuge in thy order. Om Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. And these are the last 4 lines which made the poem immortal. The dew is on the lotus. Rise, great sun, and lift my leaf and mix me with the wave. Om Mani Padme Hum. The sunrise comes. The dewdrop slips into the shining sea. This is what made the poem go viral. So the way he communicated abstract thoughts like nirvana, karma, dharma, through poetry. He just, it is sure, it was a burst of inspiration. And I think that's what really, but ultimately, Pravin, if there was no market for a Buddha-like figure, this poem would have fallen flat.
Right.
Because people were looking for a market. Arnold did not create a market. There are entrepreneurs who create markets.
Right.
There are entrepreneurs who understand markets. I think Arnold belonged to the latter category.
And what a continuing run across 150 years, which is brilliant.
Absolutely. 150 years. And I tell you what is the most surprising thing, and this has got nothing to do with entrepreneurs, but it's something to do with how this book ends. I finally, as a result of my archival research, I discovered the great grandchildren
Yes.
of Edwin Arnold living in Bhopal. And this was completely accidental how I discovered them through the National Archives. It took me some time, and I discovered his great grandchildren, and you won't believe that the names that they have. I have some photographs of them in the book, but I want to tell you what these names they are, and these names reflect the beauty of India. One great grandson is Mohammed Michael Arnold.
Yes, whose photo is that?
Mohammed Michael Arnold. And this is his photograph.
Yeah.
Mohammed Michael Arnold. His siblings are called Firoz Arnold, Nahid Arnold Ali, Farzana Arnold Siddiqui, and Fozia Arnold Raza. So, I mean, this is remarkable. I mean, that's the way to end the book. I discovered his great-grandchildren. There are, of course, some great-grandchildren living in Thailand and Australia with more prosaic names like Alwyn Turner Arnold, John Turner Arnold. But the great-grandchildren in Bhopal have these wonderfully syncretic names like Mohammed Michael Arnold. I think that reflects the nature of Indic civilization with which Edwin Arnold was so besotted with, and which he spent almost his entire life popularizing. Hitopadesha, Mahabharata, Gita Govinda, and of course, ultimate great achievement, the translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which even today is quoted. And of course, for Gandhi, as I said, it became the absolute abiding text.
Beautiful. To me, it's not just, and to all your listeners out there, Sir Arnold did it while holding a regular job as a journalist. So even
he was the editor of the Daily Telegraph, which was then it was the voice of the establishment. It was the largest selling newspaper in the world at that point of time, and it was a conservative paper. It was a conservative paper. He was the editor. He was the leader writer and the editor. I think, but he had two jobs, Pravin. He during the day he was a journalist, but I think when he went home he became an Oriental scholar. He started translating these Sanskrit works, Persian works, Arabic works. So I think he lived multiple lives.
Right. So
entrepreneur has more than one face, right? You do multiple things.
Yes. Excellent. Very, very inspiring. One last question that's come here from Ganapati Ramachandran Ganpa. For someone who has all your books, Jairam, what's your next book?
Well, the process is still sort of germinating in my mind. I'm taking a break from writing for a while. But I'm thinking of writing actually something on the building of scientific institutions in India, and something to do with the 1950s and 1960s, the challenges that building in scientific institutions, not just institutions. I'm focusing on scientific institutions. So looking at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, looking at the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, and looking at the people who made these institutions, and the troubles and the challenges they faced, and how they were able in a different India, in a different world, how they were able to create these centers of scientific excellence. That's what I really want to focus on.
Lovely. Mr. Jairam is going to take a break from writing. I wonder why. This is just 450 pages long. But for all you folks out there, having read it a couple of times, goosebump moments are all over, rediscovering India and what happened through, as Mr. Jairam said, documented evidence and proof that is all available here, to people who have quoted the light of Asia. And for me, one of the great goosebump moments was when Nobel laureate Sir C.V. Raman quoted it at the Nobel banquet. And
well,
of course,
that's a very interesting story, which will be of interest to people in Chennai. In December 1930, Sir C.V. Raman, receives the Nobel Prize in Physics, as the first Indian to do so in science. And he says that 3 books had influenced him throughout his life. The first book was by a German physicist called Helmholtz, which is not a surprise, because C.V. Raman was a physicist, and Helmholtz was perhaps the greatest physicist of the 19th century. And this was, if I remember right, a book on light, which was Raman's area. The second book was Euclid's Geometry, which has troubled every school child who's done geometry. We all know who Euclid was, because Euclid when we were in school. And the second book was Euclid's Geometry. And the third book was The Light of Asia. And he goes on to say in Stockholm that from The Light of Asia, he was inspired by the life of the Buddha, the values of compassion, the values of renunciation, the values of understanding, the values of tolerance. And he goes on to explain how Buddha became a role model for him as a human being, not necessarily as a scientist, but as a human being after reading The Light of Asia. And the other person who's profoundly influenced by The Light of Asia, which I want to mention because he's an icon to the IT community, was Swami Vivekananda.
yes.
And Swami Vivekananda, between 1893 and 1902, when he passes away, was a great admirer of Buddhism. Vivekananda thought that Buddhism was an offshoot of Hinduism, which is people have a different point of view there. And he thought that Buddhism was the highest form of Advaita, which again, people have different views there, but not of Advaita, sorry, of Vedanta. I've used in my book the number of lectures that Vivekananda gave in England, and more so in America, on the Light of Asia. He was a great admirer of the Light of Asia, a great admirer of the poem. And in 1885, the first translation of the Light of Asia, Pravin, was into Bengali. In 1885, the first translation, and the very first performance of that translation, it was translated as Buddha Charita into a Bengali play by Girish Chandra Ghosh, who is the father of modern Bengali theatre. And guess who saw the first performance of that play? Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And Paramahamsa, I discovered through archival sources, used to go into samadhi, into trance, listening to the Bengali translation of the Light of Asia. And so did Vivekananda. Of course, Vivekananda read English also. So he used the English translation much more than perhaps he used the Bengali translation. So Vivekananda is another great figure of Indian history who comes to Buddha, through this poem.
Beautiful. That's all that we have with us today. Mr. Jairam, thank you very much for the brilliant book. For all you folks out there, we are in the land when we have a textbook and we have tuition and Konar notes to go ahead and study the textbook better. This is your very own Konar notes, is available in Amazon, Flipkart, and all the channels. Go ahead, pick it up, because to me, even though I did it to research as a preparation for this meet, there are so many nuggets of Indian history, Begums of Bhopal, and a whole lot more that I was not aware of. The crazy connections that Mr. Jairam Ramesh connects through is a learning by itself for me as an entrepreneur, that there can be so much across history and you can draw the line. And case in point is how he found out the great-grandchildren and managed to have a conversation with one of them as well. The Light of Asia impacted Mr. Jairam Ramesh when he was 14. It's impacted me when I'm in my 40s, and I'm pretty certain all you folks are there in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s will go ahead with. Well, what I did was downloaded the book and passed it on to my 14-year-old daughter, because you never know what aspect of that book is going to inspire you to take on through. So, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, thank you very much. Ganpa and Vishy, who connected us and made this possible. Thank you very much.
So, Pravin, before we disperse,
yes,
I must ask you.
Yes.
What's the secret of how you maintain this part? This part I can understand, but this part, how do you maintain this fine texture, the size, and the shape?
I will reply to you in verse as a book. No, jokes apart, because that's coming out next year. Mustache Maintenance and Marketing. That's a book that I am writing, which is coming out next year. I'll be sure to pass a copy on to you, sir.
Great. Wonderful. I had a wonderful time, and look forward to continuing engagement with you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, sir. And all you folks out there, please reach out to Mr. Jairam Ramesh. He's very active on the social world, especially on.
Anybody is welcome to email me. My email address is very simple: Jairam, Jairam 5454 @gmail.com. And you are guaranteed to get a reply very soon. So anybody who wants to email me either on the book or tell me how lousy the Congress party is, which Ganpat keeps telling me all the time, and all your frustrations with my party, you're welcome to email me, and I will respond. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, all of you, Jairam, and we will close the evening with that. All the very best.
Namaskaram. Namaskaram.
Mapala sir, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, Pravin.
Lovely. Thank you.